The Quartet meeting that will be held in Moscow on Friday, March 19th is going to be very different from the one that was envisaged when they first planned this a couple of months ago. The idea had been that the so-called proximity talks, the indirect talks between Israel and the Palestinians would have now been launched, and that the Quartet would give support for those talks, perhaps make some statements about what would be on the agenda and where it was hoped that those talks would go. The idea was that those talks would go on for a few months with the hope that they would lead into direct negotiations. That was what was supposed to happen at the Quartet meeting. But now, in light of Vice President Biden's visit to Israel and this incident over an East Jerusalem settlement and the dust-up in relations between the United States and Israel, I think it's going to be a completely different Quartet meeting, and what we're probably going to see are some pretty stiff statements out of the Quartet, which is made up of the United States, the European Union, Russia, and the United Nations, all of which are going to be represented basically at the foreign minister level. And I think we're going to see some criticism of Israel. We're going to see some expectations laid out for what Israel should do to prove that it's really interested in going forward with these talks with the Palestinians. The other members of the Quartet, aside from the United States, that is Russia, the European Union, and the United Nations, are typically more sympathetic to the Palestinian side of things and less to the Israeli side of things than the United States is. So I believe that those parties, represented by Lavrov, Ashton, and Ban Ki-moon, are going to be very ready to criticize Israel in this meeting on the 19th. They've perhaps long felt that Israel deserves more nudging than it has gotten from the United States. But the question for the United States is going to be how far to go with this, and where are they going with this? Because the Obama administration engaged in a confrontation with Israel over settlements last year and then ultimately backed down. So the question now is how far do they want to go in criticizing Israel and putting pressure on Israel?
Currently, Russia also is an important counterweight to what is happening with China, where there are concerns about whether the Chinese will be on board, but as Russia is increasingly supportive of what the rest of the major powers want to do, it creates an interesting tension about whether China will want to be the odd man out in how the major powers decide to move forward. Although the White House has rightly signaled that it does not want to time-bound these negotiations because they want to get it correct, it is important to note that having an agreement signed would be an important signal that the United States and Russia can send when their delegations go to the May 2010 Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. That said, I think it's also important for us not to overestimate what the value of these modest stockpile reductions will be, particularly to critical non-nuclear weapon states of the non-aligned movement. Last year, the P5+1 agreed to a dual-track strategy of engagement and pressure with Iran in order to resolve concerns that the international community has about Iran's nuclear program. So one track was engagement in terms of talks and a low-enriched uranium deal. And on the other hand, there is the option of pressure, which is primarily in the form of economic sanctions. For a variety of reasons, the Iranians have found it difficult to engage in the offers of negotiations, and one of those reasons is the domestic political disarray that Iran is currently in. And what we see now is that the P5+1 are now exploring this option of pressure through sanctions. Unsurprisingly, there are differences of opinion among some of the members of the P5+1 about how quickly to proceed on the sanctions track and what it should include. More aggressive timelines are being set out by the French and the British and, of course, the United States. But there have been some, questions and concerns raised by Russia and China. And what we see now is a diplomatic effort amongst the P5+1 to bring everybody onto the same page about when is the right time for sanctions and what it should include. Without a doubt, Russia's support of the two-track strategy is crucial. And since the revelation of the second secret enrichment facility last September, Russia has been on board with the P5+1 strategy. Currently, Russia also is an important counterweight to what is happening with China, where there are concerns about whether the Chinese will be on board, but as Russia is increasingly supportive of what the rest of the major powers want to do, it creates an interesting tension about whether China will want to be the odd man out in how the major powers decide to move forward.
We're approaching the first anniversary of reset, at least in a formal sense. President Medvedev and President Obama met in London in April 1st, and they signed two statements at that time, one specifically on moving on a follow-on to START, but secondarily a much broader statement setting out our bilateral agenda, what it would be and how we would proceed and what the priorities would be. So I think the way to look at reset is to say, all right, how have we done on that? That, after all, was their own definition of what reset should be about. And here I think the picture is that we have made a good beginning, and it seems we have moved very substantially and positively on two major items of it. But it is, in many other respects, still a beginning, and in some ways it's fragile. Now, where have we done well? I think we've done well on START, follow-on. Those negotiations are, by all accounts, coming to their final stage, and people are now beginning to talk about when will we do the signature. The Afghan agreement that was signed in July between the two presidents has successfully, I would say, reshaped the American-Russian cooperation and joint approach to Afghanistan. There are still issues. I think we have, in some cases, a rather different set of priorities or different ideas about how to deal with the narcotics dimension of the Afghan problem. I think the Russian side is very concerned about not so much what we're up to at the moment, but how it will play out and what our longer-term approach to Afghanistan is going to be. But for the moment, it seems to me it's a success story. On the bilateral commission, I think it's a good beginning, but I think it is neither as much as people had hoped, but probably even maybe a bit more than we might realistically have expected. Things are moving well on many of those areas where we had already been working on arms control, on proliferation issues, on counterterrorism and so forth. I think it's in the areas where things really had fallen by the wayside over the previous administration's tenure, where it's been hard to get things back started again, areas like health, for instance. And finally, I think the area where I would say we've had less success is on the economic dimension. We still don't have Russia in the WTO. Trade is not really, in significant ways, different from what it has been. We don't really see all that much progress on a lot of economic issues. We've watched another year of spats and troubles over poultry and pork exports to Russia. So, I mean, I think the economic side has not been terribly successful so far. Now, there's an ambitious agenda out there for the working group on business development, but I think that has more potential than achievement to say for itself.